We are dealing with the transportation bill. I hope we're dealing with the transportation bill eventually, but there's been a great deal of work on this measure by the chairman, the ranking members of the relevant committees, and I thank them for the hard work that they have put into this. I support their efforts to give states a long-term security for moving forward with federal highway aid and transit programs. I support the efforts to give states that long-term security for planning purposes, improve the project approval process, reduce duplicative and excessive programs. But I do have very serious concerns with certain aspects of the legislation, of the proposal. And most particularly, and the reason I've come to the floor this evening, is to discuss what this legislation does to the Indian Reservation Roads Program. This is the program known as IRR. IRR is a jointly administered program between the Federal Highway Administration and the Bureau of Indian Affairs that addresses the transportation needs of our tribes by providing funds for the planning, the design, the construction, and then the maintenance activities. The Indian Reservation roads are public roads. They provide access to and within Indian reservations, Indian trust land, restricted Indian land, and Alaska Native villages. There's approximately 29,000 miles that are under jurisdiction of the BIA and the tribes. Another 73,000 miles are under state and local ownership. IRR funds can be used for any type of Title 23 transportation project that provides access to or within federal or Indian lands, and may be used for the state local matching share for apportioned federal aid highway funds. The IRR inventory is a comprehensive database of all transportation facilities that are eligible for IRR program funding by tribe, reservation, BIA agency, and region, congressional district, the state, and the county. I think it is actually important, as I look through my comments, I think, man, this history is a little bit slow in reading, but I think it's important that we understand how we came to the position of where we are today with MAP 21. For years, Alaska received very little assistance from the IRR program because we've only got one reservation, very small reservation down in southeastern Alaska, Metlakatla, and therefore little to no BIA-owned roads. The BIA maintains a national database of roads, the IRR inventory, which is used for allocation of IRR funds and also determines where the IRR funds can be used. State and county-owned roads comprise the majority of the road miles within the IRR system. A few decades ago, there were very few villages in Alaska that were putting any inventory into the system. T21 gave the committee criteria in establishing the funding formula, and it was based on the needs of Indian tribes for transportation assistance, cost of road construction, geographic isolation, and difficulty in maintaining all-weather access to employment, to commerce, health, safety, and education resources. So with the passage of T21, a rulemaking committee was established, the IRR Program Coordinating Committee. It helped to develop the funding formula, which was then published back in 2004. The Coordinating Committee is made up of 12 primary members from Indian tribes, one from each region. There were 12 alternates, 2 non-voting federal representatives. Decisions that were made by the committee were reached by consensus. It was not a majority decision process. The funding formula, which is known as the Relative Need Distribution Formula, adopted in the IRR program final rule, reflected Congress's intent that the funding distribution method balance the interest of all tribes and enable all tribes to participate in the IRR program. Now, I should note that 40% of all federally recognized tribes in the nation reside in the state of Alaska, 40%. I think that's something that many of my colleagues are not aware. That balancing of interests called for avoiding substantial allocations from the larger tribes while still addressing the central problem that historically left the smaller tribes out of the program. The prior formula distributed funds based on an inventory limited to roads built and owned by the BIA. But the new formula then broadened tribal participation by allowing the inclusion of state, county, and municipally owned IRR-eligible facilities into the inventory so that the actual IRR transportation needs could be counted for funding purposes. Back in 2003, Loretta Bullard, who is with a regional nonprofit representing Bering Straits region of Northwest Alaska in Kowarek, testified before the Senate Indian Affairs saying that the BIA had never surveyed any villages to identify the roads that were eligible for support. So there just wasn't a complete inventory at that time because there'd never been a survey up in Alaska. That was back in 2003. So as a result of the 2004 rulemaking, which took 5 years, by the way, Alaska then increased its inventory. We went out, we actually did those surveys. Alaska benefited from a competitive grant program that was established under the rulemaking for smaller tribes called the High Priority Project Program. And this legislation that we're dealing with now really seeks to undo. It takes apart all the gains that Alaska made through T21, through the 2004 rulemaking, through Safety Lieu. It's all unraveled with this legislation. Alaska is unfairly harmed by MAP 21 more than any other region in the country. Alaska loses $16 million a year under MAP 21, and tribes throughout the state will be effectively shut out of the program. This is not acceptable, Mr. President. The current negotiated regulation, which was developed again by consensus from tribes throughout the entire country, is focused on need. The new formula, which we see reflected in this legislation, was written behind closed doors by a handful of people with no government-to-government tribal consultation. Its focus is on the population and the urban areas. It disregards the trust responsibility that is owed to the 566 federally recognized tribes in our nation, 229 of which reside in the state of Alaska. Again, nearly half of all the recognized tribes in the nation. Now, I think every time I come to the floor and talk about something that relates to an issue, I've got to put up the map of Alaska so that we're all reminded how big it is. Well, I'm once again going to put up the map of the state of Alaska superimposed over the rest of the lower 48. And this is not maps that we just sketch out because we like the size. This is the proportional size when you put Alaska on superimposed over the rest of the lower 48. So this map, and it may be difficult to see, but the red, they look like little arteries going up through the center of the state. That's our road system. So all of these areas in white where you don't see anything, there are no roads there. So our roads are pretty much limited. This is the Hall Road up north, no real public traffic, but our road system is kind of this triangle down here with a few scattered in there. But what's behind this kind of great shadow of Alaska? The states that are covered up behind there. You've got North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, and Illinois are all kind of tucked under this great expanse here. So just imagine if you're from Missouri that's sitting underneath here, and to say you have no roads in that area. That's what we're talking about. And my pictorial here is all of the roads in Alaska, not the IRR roads. These are our state roads, our highways, our federal highways. This is everything. So when we're talking about the IRR piece, the Indian Reservation Roads piece, it's even more minuscule in terms of comparison. We've got approximately, the numbers are somewhat sketchy, but 16,000 miles of road, 5,600 miles of which are unpaved. But keep in mind, we've got 570,000 square miles of land to cover. So we don't have a lot of roads that we're talking about here. I'd like to highlight some of the things that we have been able to do in the state of Alaska. as a result of the IRR program. The Indian Reservation Roads Program funds the construction and the maintenance of roads and bridges within Alaska Native villages. In many cases, these are not roads that you and I would think of as a typical road. These are, Mr. President, I'm going to ask for an additional 5 minutes from my colleague, if that's acceptable.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Most of our roads, when we're talking about the IRR roads, are not necessarily roads that are going to carry a vehicle. These are roads that will carry a four-wheeler, a snow machine, the walkers. These are the way that Alaska's Native people access our subsistence resources, haul their subsistence food home. These are the roads that form the link to the village airport, which is the only way out during the wintertime. If there's no roads, you've got to be flying to all of these locations. This is a picture of, you can't really see it in the background here, but this is the village of Quigillingok, which lies on the western shore of Kuskokwim Bay. It's 388 miles west of Anchorage. This village, the primary mode of transportation is by ATV, four-wheeler, foot, snow machine in the wintertime. But you look, it's all nice, green, looks beautiful, but it's tundra, it's bog. You get down there in your rubber boots and you're going to go up to your knees. You can't walk through this. You wouldn't want to put a vehicle on it because it would do damage. So what you see here is a real technological breakthrough in how to build rural roads in places where dirt and gravel either just don't exist out there or just don't work. This was built using IRR funds from the native village of Quig, funding from the state of Alaska, funding from the Denali Commission. This is construction of a geo-grid track, and it looks like grading. It's plastic. It's like a plastic grating that overlays on that tundra that allows you to access it. IRR funding and Denali Commission funding were leveraged with other funding sources. It provided jobs in the country, within the community, excuse me. The next picture that we've got is a boardwalk, a board road that was built in Nunamikwa, which is on the South Fork of the Yukon River, about 500 miles from northwest of Anchorage. And again, this project was made possible by the Denali Commission, the state of Alaska, Nunamikwa's tribal shares from the IRR program. But these are it's just a boardwalk. But you look at this picture and you can see it's kind of rippled and wavy. Well, that's what happens when you put boards on top of a very wet tundra. And it's marshy, but at least you can walk on it. At least you can access it by your four-wheeler without doing damage either to the area, but it connects your schools, your clinics. This particular project created 7 jobs within the community and a safe road system for the community to access public facilities. This is probably a better description. This is from one of my visits down on the YK Delta, and you can see this is their road system. It connects you to the homes, to the community buildings. This is your means of transportation here. You go out on the tundra there, and again, you sink. I took Secretary Page, Secretary of Education, out there to one of our smaller villages, Tuntatuliak, and we got out and we got to the boardwalk, and he said, "When does it dry out here?" And I said, "Sir, this is as dry as it gets." And he says, "Well, where do the children play?" And I said, "Well, this is it. The boardwalk is not only your transportation route, it's where you have access in the summertime. That's why we like it in the wintertime, because it's frozen and we can utilize it." We've also got some challenging conditions in other parts of our state. In southeast in Alaska, we don't have to worry about the tundra, but we do have some challenging conditions. The Craig Tribal Association down in Craig has been working on the reconstruction of the Port St. Nicholas Road for the past 4 years. The road has several bridges that are being replaced concurrent with the road construction. Again, the Denali Commission has been a committed, critical partner in words of the tribe. In this picture, you can see this is Dog Salmon Creek here prior to the construction. This was a dilapidated, rotting wooden bridge, and then in the next picture, you can see what $1.7 million from Denali Commission, from IRR, and a modest investment really comes together. You've got a paved road, a solid bridge that's going to last for decades. But these projects couldn't be built under the reduced funding levels for small tribes that we've got proposed in MAP 21. Tribal transportation funding in the bill is directed towards these populated areas and roads that are more established to receive greater amounts of funding. So, you know, again, when you take into account an area like Alaska, where you have many miles but few people, and a formula that is designed to work against you, how do you ever make headway? How do you ever connect these communities? How do you ever allow for a transportation system that you and I maybe can't relate to, but that makes sense where they are? So, Mr. President, I have introduced an amendment that I would hope we'd have an opportunity to bring up. It restores current law and current regulations with respect to the funding formula that was developed, again, after years of negotiation in a very open, a very transparent process. Just yesterday at the Intertribal Transportation Association meeting in Minnesota, we had tribes from the Rocky Mountain region, the Great Plains region, the Midwest region, and the Navajo Nation all agree that MAP 21 sets a dangerous precedent to allow Congress to overturn the tribal rulemaking, as it's a threat to tribal sovereignty. And we're hearing more and more concerns every day about the opposition coming from those who feel that they have been circumvented by Congress in this act. In the past couple days, I've received letters from tribes from California. I've certainly received them from Alaska. I've got a letter from the Susanville Indian Rancheria, one from the Ramona Band of Cahuilla, who wrote that under MAP 21, small urban tribes with paved roads garner a significant increase in funding, while tribes such as the Ramona Band, which are rural and have poor roads, arguably those with the most need and no other access to transportation funding, will see significant decreases. So what I'm trying to do is restore some parity. I would ask that these letters from not only the Alaskan tribes, but from the Californian tribes that I've just mentioned be submitted as part of the record. Mr. President, I have other concerns with this transportation bill. I've mentioned the Denali Commission. I've joined together with my colleague, Senator Begich, to file an amendment to this bill that would restore Denali Commission's transportation program, an incredibly important program to our state. I've also raised concerns about a provision within the banking section that relates to our Alaska Railroad. These are concerns that, while they might not register fully with all of our colleagues here in the Senate, to Alaska, they're critical. Our transportation needs are different. Some might say they're unique, but we have risen to the challenge with limited funding and smart people trying to do good things to connect us in ways that make sense. So whether it is the work of the Denali Commission, what we're able to do with IRR funding, or what we need to be able to continue to do with our Alaska Railroad, we would ask for support and consideration from this body as we try to move forward with this legislation. With that, Mr. President, I thank my colleague from Oregon for giving me some additional time here this afternoon, and I would ask that my full comments be submitted for the record.